Since the day you were born, you've been praised for being obedient. Told that self-denial is virtue, that submission is strength. But what if the very system that taught you this was never designed to make you powerful, but to keep you tame? Nietzsche didn't just critique religion, he exposed it as a weapon. Not of salvation, but of control. A system built to castrate the strong and elevate the weak. You think you've been moral, but what if you've simply been manipulated? You've felt it before, haven't you? That quiet, aching frustration. That internal war between what you want and what you've been told you should want. You suppress your aggression, your ambition, your raw hunger, thinking it makes you good. But what if it just makes you invisible? You trade your power for acceptance. You shrink to fit the image of the ideal man. And in the process, you lose the fire that made you alive. Religion didn't free you, it broke you. And the worst part, you thanked it for doing so. You felt guilty for questioning it. You apologized for your instincts. But guilt is not a virtue, it's a leash. A tool used by institutions to keep your mind in a cage and your will under their thumb. Nietzsche saw this clearly. Religion taught you to fear your own nature, to doubt your strength, to hate what made you human, and now you wonder why you feel weak. But here's the truth, that primal force within you isn't evil, it's buried. And it's waiting for you to stop praying for permission, waiting for you to rise without shame. This isn't about rejecting faith, it's about reclaiming your soul from the hands of those who've twisted it. The moment you stop obeying the lies, you begin to resurrect your power. This journey isn't safe. It's not comforting, but it's real. And if you have the courage to face what's been done to you, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you can break the spell. You can tear off the mask they gave you and see who you really are beneath it. But once you open your eyes, there's no going back. So I'll ask you one thing. Not do you believe, but do you dare? The hidden chains of morality. What if your sense of goodness is actually a cage? Nietzsche wasn't out to mock morality, he wanted to expose how it was built. He believed Christian values didn't evolve naturally from human progress. They were designed, crafted during a time when the powerful ruled through strength, and the weak had no choice but to moralize their weakness. So what did they do? They rewrote the rules. They called humility a virtue. They painted ambition as sin. And they praised the lamb while condemning the lion. Think about the values you were taught as a child. Be humble. Be obedient. Be selfless. Don't seek praise. Don't stand out. These sound noble, don't they? But take a step back. Who benefits when strong men silence themselves? Who wins when you're too afraid to assert your own worth? In Nietzsche's view, this wasn't enlightenment, it was domestication. The transformation of powerful individuals into tame pets, groomed to serve a system they never chose. He called it slave morality. A morality born from resentment, ressentiment, of those who couldn't compete in strength, so they rewrote the game to favor obedience. It's like praising a bird for clipping its own wings. And over time, this narrative seeps into your bones. You feel guilty for wanting more, ashamed for thinking you're capable of greatness. Religion, culture, even your family may have told you that desire itself is dangerous, that your fire should be dimmed in the name of peace. But peace for whom? Picture a man who dreams of building something bold, starting his own business, changing the world. But he hears a voice in his head saying, "That's arrogant. Stay in your lane." That voice isn't instinct, it's conditioning. And it doesn't protect you. It neuters you. The world doesn't need more agreeable men. It needs dangerous men who've mastered themselves. Men who aren't afraid to think, speak, and act with power. You've probably met someone like that. A colleague who plays small in meetings, never pushing their ideas. Or maybe it's you, biting your tongue during family dinners to avoid being disrespectful. But every time you shrink to make others comfortable, you reinforce your own cage. And morality becomes a leash, not a compass. It pulls you back from your nature, your edge, your truth. Nietzsche didn't advocate for chaos or cruelty, he wanted honesty. He believed the strong should reclaim their values, not from cruelty, but from clarity. Strength, pride, confidence, these aren't sins. They're signals. Signals that you're alive, that your instincts are still burning beneath the surface. And the greatest tragedy? Most people never even question why those fires were buried in the first place. So here's the question. What if your moral code isn't yours? What if it was designed to keep you small? Start with this. Journal one belief you hold about being good. Then ask, who taught you that? And who benefits when you obey it? Because once you start asking those questions, something begins to crack. And that's when guilt enters the picture. Guilt as a tool of control. How guilt was engineered to break the strong. Why does your ambition feel like a sin? Why does claiming space make you feel like you're stealing it from someone else? That shame wasn't born in you, it was bred. Nietzsche saw guilt not as a moral compass, but as a leash. A refined tool of control, polished over centuries. It's how power systems train lions to believe they're lambs. Guilt is a kind of spiritual surveillance. It doesn't need guards, it lives in your head. You become your own warden, punishing yourself for instincts that once made men powerful. The craving to rise, to lead, to dominate, it's pathologized. Branded as selfish, dangerous, evil. So you shrink, even when the cage door is wide open. Religion didn't just outlaw action, it criminalized desire. Wanting became impure. Power became demonic. Nietzsche called this the internalization of instinct, the war within the soul. A man divided against himself is easy to rule. If you can be made to believe your fire is a flaw, you'll hand over the matches willingly. But guilt isn't distributed equally. The tyrant feels none. The conformist swims in it. The weak use it to drag others down. And the strong? They're taught to be ashamed of what makes them strong. Have you ever noticed how society punishes assertiveness in men, but praises obedience as maturity? It's not a coincidence. It's programming. From childhood, the seeds are planted. Be nice. Be quiet. Be grateful. Suppress anger. Hide ego. Smile even when you're burning inside. These aren't values, they're sedatives. And guilt is the chemical that keeps you sedated. It doesn't elevate your soul. It amputates it, one moral at a time. Think about it. What if your guilt isn't proof of your goodness, but of your conditioning? What if your moral pain is not your conscience, but your captivity? The more you internalize it, the less you trust your instincts. And that's the real danger, because instinct is where your edge lives. It's where your freedom begins. Nietzsche's insight was brutal. Guilt is not about justice, it's about obedience. A guilty man is easier to direct. He hesitates. He seeks approval. He's afraid to offend. Not because he's kind, but because he's been broken. The predator no longer needs chains. He's got you apologizing for your strength. So who do you become without guilt? Not reckless, not cruel, but whole. Imagine living without that voice constantly undermining you. What would happen if your desire wasn't filtered through shame, but through truth? That's the beginning of power. And that's exactly why they buried it under centuries of guilt. Because a man with no guilt is a man who can no longer be controlled. The death of instinct and the rise of slavery. How they trained the fire out of you. You weren't born broken. You were born with instinct, raw, intelligent, alive. That silent pull inside you that knew when to move, when to resist, when to act. But from your earliest years, that force was labeled wrong. Aggression became anger management. Confidence became arrogance. And sexuality? Shameful. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were powerful. They didn't kill your instinct with violence. They killed it with politeness. With endless rules of civility, with spiritual guilt disguised as virtue, with the idea that being a good person meant being predictable, passive, and controllable. Think about it. How often do you hesitate to speak your mind, not because you're wrong, but because you've been trained to fear your own voice? Nietzsche saw this clearly. Instinct is the wellspring of vitality. Without it, a man becomes tame, harmless to others and helpless to himself. He becomes someone who looks alive but has no edge. He knows what is right, but has forgotten what is real. Instinct isn't savagery. It's the part of you that dares. And when it's gone, you don't become civilized, you become obedient. Watch how this plays out. A boy who stands up to a teacher is called disruptive. A teen who questions his pastor is told he's fallen. A man who refuses to follow blind authority is labeled rebellious or lost. But lost to what? The system that rewards passivity and punishes vitality? The path they call salvation often looks suspiciously like a leash. What religion called sin often overlaps with power. Lust, your reproductive drive. Wrath, your boundary mechanism. Pride, your sense of self-worth. All demonized. Why? Because a man in full possession of his instincts cannot be manipulated easily. He's harder to market to, harder to control, harder to break. And that makes him dangerous. There's a reason men today feel empty and restless. They're not broken, they're underfed. Spiritually starved of instinct, of risk, of danger, of real experience. They scroll endlessly, consume advice, attend sermons, and still feel dead inside. Because their life lacks the heat of the primal. The very thing they were told to bury is the only thing that could have saved them. But instinct doesn't disappear, it festers. Repressed aggression becomes depression. Suppressed desire becomes addiction. When you deny the body, it doesn't vanish, it revolts. And instead of becoming more moral, you become more fragmented. Hollow men performing polite scripts, while the soul gnashes its teeth beneath a forced smile. Is this really virtue? Or just fear wearing a robe? Reclaiming your instinct isn't regression, it's resurrection. The key is not to act on every impulse blindly, but to stop shaming the parts of yourself that make you alive. You don't need more dogma. You need courage. The courage to feel desire without guilt. To speak with force. To move with purpose. Because when instinct returns, so does the man. If this made sense to you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and activate the notifications. You don't want to miss the next step on reclaiming your true power. Also, leave a comment with "I'm breaking free" if you're ready to break out of the chains and start living life on your own terms. Reclaiming the will to power. You don't need saving. You need to remember who you are. They told you to wait. Wait for grace. Wait for a sign. Wait for someone higher to tell you it's okay to act. But while you waited, life moved on, and weaker men ruled you. Nietzsche didn't see the will to power as cruelty. He saw it as life's engine. The drive not to dominate others, but to overcome yourself. To shape your own becoming, rather than be shaped. How many times have you diluted your ambition just to fit in? You weren't born for compliance. And yet, here you are, apologizing for wanting more. You lower your voice, you shrink your desires, you edit yourself until there's nothing left but politeness. But politeness is not virtue. It's camouflage for fear. You were made to rise, not blend in. The will to power isn't about being louder or more aggressive. It's about presence, quiet conviction, the unshakable feeling that you own your space, that you act from the center of your being. Religion told you that pride was a sin, but Nietzsche argued the opposite. The sin is not believing in your own strength. The sin is wasting it on guilt and obedience. Look around. The men who rise are not always the smartest, but they act. They dare. They seize what the passive pray for. And the irony? Those who suppress their will end up resenting those who use theirs. He's selfish, they whisper. No, he's free. And freedom terrifies the domesticated man, because it reflects what he could have been. Modern spirituality wants you to detach, to surrender, to transcend the ego. But Nietzsche believed your ego, the part of you that says, I want, I will, I can, is not the enemy. It's the beginning. Without it, you're not enlightened. You're erased. The will to power is the fire that lets you sculpt your soul into something worthy, something real. And no, this isn't about constant motion or blind ambition. Sometimes will is restraint, the power to not speak when anger flares, the strength to walk away when addiction calls. It's not chaos. It's command, the kind of inner force that doesn't wait for validation. It acts because it must, because it knows what it is. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting for permission? If you stopped outsourcing authority to books, prophets, parents, lovers, systems? The truth is, most people aren't tired, they're underexpressed. Trained to fear their own potential. You don't need another rule. You need a target, a mission, a raw reason to rise again. So reclaim it. Your will. Your center. Your spine. Tear it back from the passive habits, the inherited guilt, the spiritual gaslighting. You are not here to be saved. You are here to become. To forge your character like a blade, not to please the world, but to meet it fully armed. This is not rebellion. This is resurrection. Why society punishes strength. Strength used to be revered. Now it's feared and labeled. In a world addicted to comfort and consensus, the man who refuses to bow becomes a threat. Not because he's evil, but because he reminds others of what they've given up. You've seen it. Decisiveness gets called arrogance. Discipline becomes toxic. Power becomes something to apologize for. Why? Because strength forces a mirror on the weak. Your presence alone exposes their excuses. And instead of rising, they weaponize morality to pull you down. It's easier to shame a lion than to admit you've become a sheep. Society doesn't fear cruelty, it fears clarity. A man with purpose doesn't need permission. That's why they hate him. This isn't about brute force. It's about inner sovereignty. A man who governs his own mind doesn't kneel, doesn't conform, and doesn't need external validation. That's dangerous in a culture built on dependency. Every system, from politics to religion, prefers you obedient, predictable, and safe. But your silence is their security. Your compliance is their fuel. Jung warned of this inversion of virtue. He saw how the collective shadow projects strength as evil and cowardice as good. You felt this. The moment you set boundaries, you're accused of being harsh. The moment you pursue excellence, they call it obsession. They don't want your humility, they want your submission. There's a difference. Think of the classroom. The outspoken boy gets labeled a problem. The passive one is praised. It starts early, and by adulthood, the lesson is internalized. Don't stand out, don't speak up, don't be too much. But strength by nature is too much. It disrupts. It creates. It refuses to fit in. And deep down, that terrifies people. You've probably been told to be kind. But kindness without strength is just a mask for fear. Real kindness comes from power held in check, not from weakness begging for approval. Nietzsche believed that when strength is demonized, society decays. Because nothing great was ever built by men afraid of their own potential. So ask yourself, when you held back, who did you protect? Them, or yourself? Every time you watered yourself down to be liked, you made yourself smaller for a world that profits from your hesitation. But what if your sharpness isn't the problem? What if it's the cure? Maybe what they call too much is exactly what this dying culture needs. Your strength doesn't need their permission. It needs your acceptance. And once you stop apologizing for it, everything shifts. You'll stop attracting the weak. You'll stop tolerating their shame games. And most importantly, you'll remember who you were before they taught you to flinch. Because true power is not loud. It's unapologetically still. Becoming dangerous again, in the right way. You've been told to tone it down, to fit in, to be normal. What if all of this wasn't to protect you, but to tame you? The world is full of men who have forgotten how to be dangerous, how to wield their strength for themselves and not for the approval of others. Nietzsche didn't just want you to be free from morality's chains. He wanted you to be free enough to face the world with power and purpose. But to do that, you'll have to become dangerous again. The right kind of dangerous. Danger doesn't mean recklessness. It means control. It means you have the power to destroy, but choose not to. It means you know your limits, your darkness, and your strengths so well that you can navigate life without ever truly losing yourself. In today's world, most people are afraid of their own shadows, but the true danger lies in never confronting them. When you ignore your darkness, you feed the very things that keep you weak. Take a moment and think, when was the last time you felt truly alive? I'm not talking about fleeting pleasure or surface-level happiness. I mean that raw, visceral energy of knowing you could take on the world if you wanted to. You've been living in a state of paralysis. Society wants you passive, compliant, obedient. But that's not living, that's surviving. Being dangerous means taking control of your narrative, not letting anyone dictate who you should be. The world doesn't need more good men. It needs men who are whole, who have integrated every part of themselves, the light and the dark, the good and the bad. When you reject your shadow, you reject your full potential. It's that part of you that society wants you to forget, but it's also the part of you that holds your greatest power. The men who are too much are the ones who remember this. They are dangerous not because they're aggressive, but because they are unapologetically themselves. Religion and society want you to deny your true nature. They want you to suppress your instincts, to shun your desires, to be constantly self-sacrificing. They're terrified of what happens when you embrace your full power. The path to becoming dangerous again requires you to go against everything you've been taught. It means owning every part of yourself without guilt, without shame, without fear. Only then will you be able to break free from the prison of society's expectations. But how do you begin? Start by questioning everything. Challenge the beliefs that have been forced upon you. Refuse to accept the idea that you should always be nice or good. The world doesn't need another nice guy. It needs someone who will rise above the noise, who will speak their truth even when it's uncomfortable. It needs someone who isn't afraid to offend the weak. To be dangerous means never apologizing for your strength, your independence, or your will. And this is where the real test begins. When you tap into your dangerous nature, you will encounter resistance. People will try to pull you back into the fold, to make you doubt yourself, to make you believe you're too much. But that's when you must stand firm. You are not a tool to be used by others. You are a force of nature. And if you want to reclaim your power, you must be willing to confront the resistance head-on. In the end, the most dangerous man is not the one who seeks conflict, but the one who has mastered himself. The world is full of men who are afraid to embrace their true power. They've been conditioned to believe that their strength is a threat, that their instincts are something to be ashamed of. But when you finally integrate your shadow and stand in your full power, you become something rare. a man who is not only free but unstoppable. This is your return. You've heard the truth today, the kind that most people avoid. The kind that challenges everything you've been told, everything you've been conditioned to believe. You've seen how the values you've followed have kept you imprisoned, how religion, society, and morality have tried to break you down instead of build you up. The question now is, what will you do with this power? Will you stay caged, following the same path of obedience and self-denial, or will you finally break free? The choice is yours. You can continue to suppress your instincts, to live in guilt and self-sacrifice, or you can reclaim your strength, your instincts, your will. The path of true freedom lies before you, but it's not for the weak-hearted. It requires you to confront the darkness, to accept the dangerous aspects of yourself that have been denied for too long. Are you ready to be dangerous again? The world is built to keep you weak, to suppress your power, and to punish your strength. But what if you stopped playing by their rules? What if you embraced the full force of your being, integrated your shadow, and became the powerful, whole person you were meant to be? You don't need to be saved. You need to reclaim your identity and rebuild from within. I challenge you today, don't wait for permission to be powerful. Step into your strength, confront your fears, and finally free yourself from the prison of guilt and self-doubt. This isn't just about a philosophy or a mindset shift. It's about taking control of your life and your destiny. The transformation you've been searching for is already within you. It's time to wake up and stop playing small. If you're ready for more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and activate notifications so you never miss the truth. Comment, "I'm breaking free" below. Let the world know you're stepping into your power. And if you feel this message resonates, share it with others who need to hear it. Stay tuned for the next video, where we dive deeper into why the world is afraid of the strong, and how you can harness that fear to build an unshakable foundation of power. Get ready. The revolution of self begins now.